Scripture reading will be Acts 9, and I'll begin in verse 36. In Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which, when translated, is Dorcas, who was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once." Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and he prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called the believers and the widows and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon.
You know, when I was looking through our devotional guide for the year and I was looking through those daily devotionals, there were some of the names that I looked at and I thought, well, that's going to be easy. I mean, you can find the problem with David and Daniel and Samuel and Abraham and people like that is narrowing it down. And then there's some other names that you look at and you say, oh, that's going to be a little more challenging. Well, when I first saw Dorcas's name, I thought, well, that'd be pretty easy. We can preach about service, and that'll cover that pretty well. But that's what we know about her when we talk about her, you know. But some are easy, some you have to dig a little bit to find. That's kind of what I've found as I've looked through that stuff. And when I started studying for the lesson, I realized there was more to her than I had thought of before. She was deeper than maybe I had given her credit for being as I looked into Dorcas a little bit. My full name is George Ewan Hulett Jr. I was named after my dad, George Ewan Hulett. And he was named after his great-grandfather, sort of. His great-grandfather's name was George Washington Bland. You'll never guess who he was named after. But my granddaddy's name was Denver Ewan Hulett, so he tagged my dad with the Ewan, and my dad passed that down to me, and I've passed it down to Brian. And so there's something sometimes in a name when we look at it. But you know what? In my whole life, I don't think I've ever met a lady named Dorcas. I've met a few Tabithas, but I don't know that I've ever met a Dorcas in my life, by name at least. And it's kind of interesting, you know, the name doesn't roll off the tongue like Emma or Chloe or Katie or Abby or Elizabeth or any of those names. No, Dorcas just kind of sits there. And so, like I said, I've met a few Tabithas. When I was a youth minister in Alabama, one of the elders gave me a tip. He said, if you can't remember one of the older ladies' names, he said, any of the ladies in the congregation, if you can't remember her name, he said, just call her Mary. And I thought he was joking at first until I found out there were 8 Marys in the congregation. You know, that was a pretty good guess. And that was kind of a big deal. But as I stated, I don't remember ever meeting anyone named Dorcas in my life. But I've met a lot of Dorcases in the church. I have met Dorcas many times over just by a different name in the church. And like most of us, her legacy has more to do with what she does than for what she said. We don't remember her words, but we remember her faithful service, and that's what it goes by. Now, Tabitha was her Greek name, I guess, or her Aramaic name, and Dorcas was her Greek name. So her name was Dorcas, and it's translated Tabitha. The Hebrew equivalent is Sabiah, or Sabia. I think probably Sabia, but we usually pronounce that I long. And the name means gazelle or deer. There's the names, all of our names have meaning. A lot of times we don't know what they are until we look at them later, but her name means gazelle or deer, and history records that nomadic people that traveled a lot oftentimes named their children after animals that they saw on the way. There were often times where people would be named after lions or after deer or after things like that, but her name means deer or gazelle, and in fact today, if you look at one specific variety of gazelle, its scientific name is Gazella dorcas. Gazella dorcas, that's the scientific name of a particular gazelle. Maybe it's named after her, or maybe she's named after it. It simply means that's her name, and that's the way it goes. By Luke chapter 9, there's so many Jewish and Greek Christians in and around Joppa, and that's modern-day Tel Aviv, if you want to figure out where it's at on a map or something like that. And it's pretty evident from the use of both of her names that Luke wanted people to know who he was talking about when he wrote Acts. And he expected people to know her name. Some of them would know her as Tabitha because they were of the Aramaic descent and they spoke Aramaic. Others would know her as Dorcas, so he gave us both of her names so we would recognize her when we read about her. And he wanted everybody to know because she's well known. That's what we see as we read this text. She's well known, she's well respected, she's loved in the community. And so it makes sense to say, this is who she is. She's not just some person, she's this person that you've heard of. And so he makes sure we know her name. Robert Herrick, in the 17th century, he was an English poet, and he wrote a poem called The Widow's Tears. He also subtitled it The Dirge of Dorcas. Well, that sounds like a terrible name, the dirge. I don't want any dirges, but here's what he wrote about her. As he wrote about those strong, resilient women who are mourning the loss of their friend Dorcas. He says, "Farewell the flax and reaming wool with which thy house was plentiful. Farewell the coats, the garments, and the sheets, the rugs made by thy hand. Farewell thy fire and thy light that ne'er went out by day or night." And the chorus goes, "No, or thy zeal so speedy that found a way by peep of day to feed and clothe the needy. Sleep with the beauties here while we will show these garments made by thee. These were the coats, in these are read the monuments of Dorcas dead. These were thy acts, and thou shalt have these hung as honors o'er thy grave. And after us distress, should fame be dumb, thy very tomb would cry out, thou art blessed." Pretty interesting idea. I think sometimes we look at art and we see pictures of Jesus and pictures of the cross and pictures of the apostles and pictures of the Last Supper and pictures of David and Goliath and things like that. And here's a word picture of this great lady of God, penned some 1,700 years after her death, 1,800 years after her death, memorializing the life that she lived. The legacy of Dorcas is one of loving care and service. Like the story of Ruth, hers is one of sacrifice and care and concern. She gave of herself without counting the cost. Like Abigail, she fed and clothed those that were in need. When David and his soldiers came by, Abigail provided the food they needed to continue on their way. Like Martha, her house was one of hospitality that people were welcome in and felt welcomed to. And she was one of those that allowed that. And her legacy in the church today continues. I know of several congregations that have a Dorcas ministry or a Dorcas closet to provide clothes for those in need. I know of others with a Dorcas ministry specifically to the widows and widowers of their congregation, and they call it by that name. And when I was preparing for this lesson, I thought, why Dorcas? Why here? How can I preach about Dorcas at Christmas time? You know, and then I thought, well, I'll just preach on service and I'll use her life as an example, and she'll be kind of an aside to the sermon. But as I studied more about her, I came to appreciate this great woman and the impact she had on the church. You know, the end of our scripture reading says there were many who came to be believers because of her influence. That's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big deal. She had a huge impact on the church. And I think we need to see that when we look at this lady. Again, I was kind of put away because I get so tired of hearing people put down the church and they say, well, the Church of Christ, y'all put women second place. Y'all always make women second-class citizens and you don't treat them right. Well, it's true that only men can serve as deacons and elders in the church. But that's not our rule, that's God's rule. I didn't set that, God did. And so I can accept that. In the New Testament, we see several prominent ladies who made an impact on the church and through their service. Dorcas is one, but so are Martha and Salome and Phoebe and Priscilla and many others. They all served, and since the Greek word for service is the same Greek word as the word for deacon, you can say they served in the same way or in much the same way as deacons do. And there are some who today would say, well, that means you can have female deaconesses because they used that word, servant, they used that word, diakonos, and so you can. But the truth was that their service was of a more personal and private nature than the public service of the deacon. And by the way, that personal and more private nature was oftentimes much more valuable than waiting tables. Don't you think? There were probably several deacons in Joppa, but Dorcas is the one who gets mentioned. You know, I think maybe we ought to realize the value of the service. Why would anybody want to diminish the role of godly women and change God's plan just so we could give them a title? I just can't see that. And yet it happens some places, and I don't like that. Every congregation has deacons, but not every congregation had a Dorcas. We do. I'm so thankful that we do. We may be the church that eats a lot, and yeah, we do that. I mean, I like that. And by the way, don't forget finger foods for tonight. Where's Don Dooley at? There he is, right there. Don, finger foods, that's not soup. And for most of us, it's not cobbler, okay? Just so you know. Finger foods for tonight. And by the way, if you want to participate in the gift exchange this evening, don't let $10 keep you from doing that. Talk to Judd or to me, and we'll make sure that you're taken care of on that one way or another. And yeah, we may be the church that fellowships, but we're also the church that works and serves. How many of you, ladies, I'm talking to ladies. Guys, listen to this because you're going to see your wife here. You're going to hear her name. How many of you have worked on our puppets for Lads to Leaders, or decorated for VBS, or taught the nursery class, or prepared meals for a funeral or for someone who had surgery, or took one of the young ones out to eat, or showed up on a work day to clean, or helped somebody move, or prepared Thanksgiving baskets, or provided food for our pantry, or snacks for the teachers, or cooked for the whole church, or hosted young people in your home for a youth event that was going on, or any of 1,000 other tasks of service that have happened. How many of our Dorcases have been involved in those ministries? Yeah, pretty valuable. Pretty valuable. No church could survive without the service of our ladies. And it hurts me when I hear people say, we put them in second place. No, we wouldn't exist without them. I appreciate our deacons. I do. But there's no way all of these things could be done by just a few good men. No way in the world. The character of Dorcas is just amazing. If pure and undefiled religion is to visit widows and orphans in their affliction, keep oneself unstained from the world, then that's her. That's the way she's described. What a great way to describe her in her legacy. Because that's exactly what God wants. A preacher friend, Russell Smith, he remembers this about his mother-in-law. He says, when my mother-in-law passed away, I believe everybody at the funeral home thought they were her best friend. I really do. I think that speaks to her character. I think all those people who stood beside Peter showing him all Dorcas had done for them probably thought they were her best friend. What a testimony of a woman of godly character. And she wasn't alone. Martha opened her home to the Lord and to his companions, even though there were lots of them. So did John Mark's mother. The widow from Zarephath took the last of the food she had for her and her son, and she fed the wandering prophet as he came through her town. The Shunammite woman had her husband prepare a room up on the roof so that when Elisha came through, he was able to have a place to stay while he was conducting his ministry through there. Ruth gave up everything, including her youth and the hope of family, although she did get blessed in that later on. But she gave up everything to go back and take care of Naomi. And I can't begin to count the number of ladies that have had a huge impact on my own life and ministry. I just can't even begin. But I will share one story. When I first went to work in northern Kentucky, we were foreigners there. It was a mission church, but we were from the South, and Kentucky's not really, part of it's from the South, sort of, and part of it's from somewhere else. And not sure exactly where that is. Gail says, you could tell the ones that were more related to Ohio. But having said that, one of the things and one of the people I met, the first Sunday I preached, there was a sweet older lady who came up to me and met me at the back door, and she looked at me and she says, "You're my favorite preacher we've ever had." And I said, "Well, thank you." But to keep me from getting my head too big, she says, the next words out of her mouth were, "I'm deaf as a post, and I didn't hear a word you said, but you sure smiled a lot." Over the next couple of years, Ruth Connor came to be very dear to my heart. And she was very special to me. The poem she wrote still hangs on the wall in one of our bedrooms. It's right there. It's in what I call my man cave room. And I see it every day, and it reminds me of her. It's called George and the Deer. And if you'd like to read it, I'll let you read it, but I won't let you have it. This is a very precious memento of a very special lady who had a huge impact on my life. The very last line says, "The little deer said, 'I'm sorry, George,' as he quickly ran away." So that's just a clue to how it works that way. And she's just one of so many. She's just one of so very many. When you go in that room, there's a great big huge razorback on the wall. It's a pen and ink drawing, and that's a special gift from a special friend that had a special impact in my life, and so on and so forth. Throughout our house, you see where Dorcas has had an effect on us. And I bet she has on you too. Everywhere you look. The gifts of Dorcas, it's more than food, it's more than garments, it's more than tunics, it's grace. It was, let me give to you because you have need. It was love, those acts of charity, the idea that it's not just I want to clothe you because you're cold, it's I want to provide something for you because I care about you, because I love. It was compassion for those in need. I've had people come to me and they say, "Hey, I noticed so-and-so needs a coat. Would you take this to them?" I've had people come to me and say, "Hey, will you make sure so-and-so gets this?" And it may be money, or it may be an item, it may be something that somebody needs that they knew they need, and they didn't want to get credit for the gift. They just wanted to make sure the gift was given where it needed to go. And I've delivered those, and people ask me, well, who's it from? I can't tell you. I could, but I'd have to kill you. That's the way I usually say it. But I always say, the person wanted you to have it. And they didn't necessarily want you to know where it came from. They just wanted you to have it. They wanted to bless your life. And so we see that. We see her compassion. We see her industriousness. You know, she was full of good works. That's what it says. She was full of good works. I don't know. Kathy, there you are. Kathy does that Quilts of Valor thing. How many quilts? Nearly 1,000, I heard. 900 and what? Right at 900 quilts that she's done. Folks, she didn't do that in 15 minutes one afternoon. She didn't do it all by herself either. She had help. But I'm telling you, those kind of good works, that kind of love takes time. Helen, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. She didn't give me a pecan pie for my birthday this year. It's the first year since I've been here I didn't get a pecan pie from Helen. And I can tell you some of those times her fingers hurt while she was making my pecan pie. Some of those times she didn't feel like doing it, but she blessed me anyway. Folks, we've got Dorcas all around us. We just don't even realize it. We don't even realize the blessings we have amongst ourselves. And we have an example, selflessness. She made those garments for others, not for herself. You know, I'm sure there was probably once or twice when Dorcas made one of those things and she said, ooh, that would look really good for me to wear Sunday morning to church. And then she gave it to somebody else. I'm sure that was the case because I know there are people here who have gone out and bought gifts for the gift exchange thinking, you know, I'd like to have that for myself. And that's the way it happens sometimes. The gifts that we have from God are meant to be regifted. Did you ever think about that? The gifts that we have for God are meant to be regifted. Scripture's replete with teaching and examples of men and women using their gifts for God's service. And it starts off with, for God so loved the world that he gave, and for Dorcas so loved that she gave, and we so love that we give. You know, sometimes it's okay to regift something. And I'm not talking about like the television commercial where they're standing there, well, who gave us this ugly thing? And the girl on the other side of the Ring doorbell says, I did. You know, oops. I'm not talking about that kind of regifting. But regifting our talents to someone else, or maybe regifting a warm coat or a blanket to someone in need, those blessings will make all the difference in the world. Dorcas was gifted with grace and love and compassion, industriousness, selflessness, and she regifted those same gifts to everybody else and shared them with everybody around her. When she died, the disciples in Joppa, they knew Peter was nearby in Lydda. And James Burton Kaufman points out that it's apparent they didn't call Peter to do the funeral. That's not what they called him over there for, because they laid her in an upper room instead of a tomb. They knew the power of God. They knew the effects of what God's power would have. They knew Peter was an apostle. They knew that God was working through Peter, and they anticipated something special happening. So they laid her out instead of in a tomb, in a room, and it's kind of interesting. I read that in Kaufman's commentary, and I thought that was kind of an interesting comment that he put there. But I've never looked at it from that perspective. I always read it kind of straightforward. She died. They called Peter in, maybe to do the funerals, kind of what I always thought. And that she was probably prominent in his ministry. She was prominent in everybody else's life around there. But Kaufman raises a really good point here about her being in an upper room instead of being already laid in a tomb when Peter gets there. And then we get the resurrection of Dorcas. That's an actual picture. No, it's not. I think one of the reasons we don't have any actual photos of Dorcas is because she would have always been the one behind the camera. It wasn't about look at me. It was about let me serve you. And so instead of being the one in front of the camera all the time, she was always the one behind. The result of raising Dorcas was exactly the result of raising Lazarus. And about him, the Pharisees said, "Behold, the whole world has gone after him," in John 12, speaking of Jesus. And the text says, many believed in the Lord because of the resurrection of Dorcas. I can't help but think that many believed in the Lord also because of what Dorcas did in her second life. Because I bet she continued in all of those graces. I bet she continued in all of those good works. I bet she was the number one person everybody wanted to call for their ladies' day. Hey, come and tell us about dying and being raised back. I bet she was the first one on the list. But at some point, Dorcas died again. But her legacy continues today. Maybe we can take the gifts God has given us, the talents God has given us, and re-gift them to others and be a blessing to their life as Dorcas was. Maybe when we leave this world, people will look at the things and the blessings that we've blessed them with and say something like, "She holds a very special place in my heart. And she may already be buried, but I look forward to seeing her again someday." It's very true. It's very real. It's very much a part of life as godly people. I'm not talking about things. Oh, yeah, we can give things, and things are nice. But I'm talking about giving our lives, sharing our lives with each other, and sharing our lives with those we love. To live our life in such a way that our legacy is that we gave of ourselves and that we make a difference. Maybe to one life, maybe to many lives, but that we make a difference the best we can. This morning's lesson is about someone who gave of herself entirely and completely. And what more has Jesus asked of any of us than that we give ourselves for him? She was a great woman, but she's not any greater than any of us can be if we'll do the same thing, to give ourselves first to the Lord and then to each other. This morning, maybe it's time for you to recommit yourself. You can do it right where you're at. You don't have to make a big public scene and say, "Hey, I want to commit myself, recommit myself to the Lord." You can do that where you're at. You may have some sin that's between you and God, and nobody else knows about it except you and God, and you can confess your sin to him, and he says he's faithful and just to forgive us of all unrighteousness. Just like that, you don't have to come all the way to the front. But you know what? You may be struggling with something in your life, and we can help. You may not have ever put on Jesus in baptism, and we can help. If it's time for you to make a public commitment, do that now. If it's time for you to make a private commitment, recommit yourself now. Do that while we stand and sing to encourage you.